So my name is Angelina Lozano, and my brother is Jason Vukovich. And I found, so quick backstory: we have the same brother or the same father, but he didn't know I existed. He's about 10 years older than me. Our father had them, left them, had me later on, but never stayed around to see me born. The only reason I knew I had two brothers was my family knew who our father was and knew he had two sons prior to me being born, and they told me about that. So, all growing up, like when the internet came about, I would start getting on the internet and I would start, I would research, I would search for my dad and I would try to find my brothers because I was curious. And I did that and I could never find anything. I would find my dad and I would find his current wife, who I thought at the time was their mother, but I could never find any evidence of the two boys. And I was flabbergasted by that. So I did that off and on for about 16 years. And then finally in 2017, an ad came across my computer screen and it was for, ancestry.com free 1 month trial. And I was like, screw it. I'm going to sign up for this 1 month trial and see what I can find in the next month. And so I did. And I ended up finding, within 3 days, I had found my dad's side of the family and I had located who my brothers were. I'd pinpointed who my brothers were. And I had found out that Jason was in prison for his crimes.
In June of 2016, 41-year-old Jason Christian Vukovich found the names and addresses of local sex offenders and decided to assault and rob them inside of their own homes. Attacking late at night, armed with a hammer, Jason told one of his victims, Wesley Damarest, that he was an avenging angel that was there to mete out justice for the people he had hurt. In addition to Wesley Damarest, a man that had been put on the sex offender registry roughly 10 years prior, Jason attacked and robbed two other men, Charles Albee and Andreas Barbosa. All lived in the area of Anchorage, Alaska, and had been previously convicted for sex crimes, ranging from possession of child pornography to sexual abuse of a minor. While Jason simply robbed and assaulted the first two men, his assault on the third man, Wesley Damarest, would see an escalation in his level of violence. Jason was arrested just minutes after this crime, and was in prison awaiting sentencing at the time that his sister, Angelina, discovered who he was.
And this was before he was sentenced. This was in November of 2016, I believe. Basically, I had found him before he was sentenced, a few months before he was sentenced. And, I was heartbroken. I had always grown up thinking that my dad and, had married this woman, had two boys, and he raised them and they lived happily ever after. And he had just at some point cheated on the mom and had me and didn't want anything to do with me. So whenever I found out about their lives and how they had this horrible childhood of, their mother remarrying to this child molester and they're subjected to that and nobody came to their side, I was super heartbroken. So when I found my brother, I was pretty upset about it. I didn't reach out to him right away. I had asked one of their half brothers if I could reach out, if he could give me Joel's information, and he reached out. Joel is our other brother. So my two brothers are Jason and Joel. Joel's the oldest. And Joel had reached back out to their half brother and said, no, I don't give her my information. I don't really want anything to do with her, or I don't care, So I haven't been in touch with Joel ever. He doesn't want to know me. He's actually not in touch with Jason at all anymore either. But so, I was a little heartbroken about that. And I didn't know how to handle reaching out to Jason at first because he was on the news. He did have this whole, crime, thing that he had done. And I didn't know how to help him. And I didn't want, to be honest, I didn't want to be swept under the rug and swept under the rug into that another paper on the desk kind of thing. So I wanted to wait until he was sentenced to be able to actually reach out to him. And I remember I want to say it was April of when was he sentenced? He was sentenced in 2018,
Yeah,
I think.
2018. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he was sentenced in 2018. So that was right. So it was November 2017 when I found him. So fast forward a few months, I've been checking and checking and checking. I hadn't written to him yet. But I had been in touch with our father's side of the family, so some cousins of ours. And, they accepted me, which was awesome. And she had reached out to me in April of 2018 and said, hey, do you have Jason's address to write him at the prison? I'd love to write him a letter. So I went on the internet and searched, his name and tried to find it. And the first thing that came up was that his sentencing, that he was sentenced to 23 years. And that's actually how I found out about his sentencing. Was I was actually going on Google to look to find his address so my cousin could write to him. And I was devastated. Like, I was in shock. Like, I just couldn't believe, after everything that he had been through and after everything, they let him down, that had happened. So I finally, at that point, broke down and wrote him a letter. It was like a 9-page letter explaining who I was and explaining that I had researched, and I'd spent those months researching the internet and reading every letter that he had written to the public, every article I could find, any details that I could find on his case, anything that I could find. I did my research, and just piecing together that puzzle, I told him, I said, I cannot believe that there's not a single person that stood by your side during this whole thing. And I don't know if you'll have me, but I'm your sister. And, I'm here if I'm here for you and I'm on your side, is basically what I told him. And he got that letter. He immediately wrote me a letter back and called me. And I remember I didn't realize the number was what it was. It had been a week or two, like a little over a week. It wasn't fresh in my mind that I'd just written to my brother. It wasn't just like I just sent it, yesterday, and I'm like anxiously awaiting. It had been a little over a week. And then I get this random 800 number or something calling me, and like I had declined it, and it called me a couple times and I declined it, and I had cussed about it or something. And my husband was like, dang, Angelina, what if it's your brother? And I was like, what? And I just kind of gave him this look like, oh, that's not my brother. And I pick up my phone, right? And I call the number back, and it was like Securus phone company, inmate, Securus, this is an inmate has called you from blah, blah, blah. And I remember throwing the phone across the room and just like sobbing. And then, so I did the research right then, and I got a Securus account. I put money on the account so he could call me, and he called me the next day. And I just remember answering the phone and being like, hello. And he was like, you answer the phone when your big brother calls you. It's the first words he ever said to me. And yeah. And so ever since then, I think I spent like $30-$40 that night on phone calls alone, just because we could not shut up to each other. We were just word vomiting back and forth. And basically we've been best friends ever since. He calls me every single day. And yeah, and so that's how I met my brother, and I found out about his whole story. So, and I've been to see him 3 times. I've been to Alaska 3 times to visit him. So at every, and I always tell this story about like being pregnant too, like my first daughter, she ended up coming out with red hair. Okay. My husband's got brown hair. I have brown hair. We both had blonde hair when we were kids. And you play, when you're pregnant with your first kid, you play all these different things about what your kid could possibly look like. And then the one thing that I didn't play out that was that she could have red hair. And so that's kind of like the same story with my brother, is of all the scenarios that I played out in my head about meeting my brothers for the first time or finding my brothers for the first time, that is like so far off the map that I didn't, like, there was no way I would have ever thought of that in my entire life. So it was definitely a shocker, definitely something I wasn't expecting. I will say this, that meeting a sibling, or when Jason and I met for the first time, it was really weird because I don't have any other siblings. Okay. So I was raised an only child. And I didn't know what having a sibling was like. But when I met, it's like siblings have this weird connection. Like it's a silent connection that you have. And when I met Jason, and he would literally say things that I was thinking before I said them, or feelings, he would literally say, I know how you feel this way. Or, he would know things about me he would predict things about me that there's no way he could have known. And it was just immediately I knew it was that weird sibling bond that people talk about that if you don't have siblings, you don't know about. So it was
Mhm.
very, very unique and special. So.
As you just heard, Jason and Angelina have grown close over the past several years. She even considers him one of her best friends, despite them not meeting until they were both adults. However, the more that Angelina has learned about her brother, who will conceivably be convicted for the next 2 decades, she would discover that his backstory was about as different from hers as possible. Jason was the second of 2 sons born to his mother and father, but his father wasn't involved in his life growing up. His mother ended up remarrying a man named Larry Lee Fulton, who was convicted of second-degree abuse of a minor in 1989, when Jason was still a child. As Angelina would learn, Jason and Joel, their older brother, had been sexually and physically abused by their stepfather, Larry Fulton, growing up. But after his conviction in 1989, Lee was sentenced to what amounted to no jail time, and would watch over Jason for the next few years, until he finally ran away from home.
Yeah, and yes, that's exactly right. And it's funny because, like I said, so I didn't know my father. My mother passed away when I was 6. I was kind of passed around from family member to family member. So this whole time growing up, not having parents, myself thinking I had the short end of the stick, when in reality, he grew up with 3 parents, and it was a far worse situation. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just
Mhm.
so crazy and ironic how all of that played out.
After running away from home as a teenager, Jason would spend the next several years in and out of trouble with the law. He was convicted at least 8 times for various felonies during adulthood, theft, possession of a controlled substance, and assault among them, and became a regular user of methamphetamine, per his own admission. Later, in a letter Jason wrote to the Anchorage Daily Press, he wrote, "My silent understanding is that I was worthless, a throwaway. The foundations laid in my youth never went away." Jason claims that the abuse from his childhood led to a lot of mental and emotional issues that affected him throughout his adulthood, and this led to him being in and out of jail all along the West Coast, leading up to the summer of 2016. That is when he, back home in Alaska, decided to finally begin focusing his aggression in on sexual offenders, in particular pedophiles, writing in his letter to the Anchorage Daily Press that kids should be able to live without the threat of pedophilia lingering around them. This eventually led to Jason committing the crimes he has become most well known for, which were carried out in June of 2016.
So his 3 crimes. So the first crime, first name, he had the name, he had the address, and what he would do is he would go up to the door, he knocked on the door, and they answer the door. And he verifies, he has pictures of these people. He verified who they were. Are you so and so? Yes. And he would push his way in. Okay. So first guy, he pushes his way in, sits the guy down, gives him a talking to, slaps the guy around a little bit, basically steals some stuff, and then leaves. Second guy, and this is like the short recap of these stories. Jason has the full detailed, but so the second guy, pretty much the same thing. He knocks on the door, guy answers, he verifies his identity, pushes his way in, sits him down on the bed, gives him a talking to, slaps him around a little bit. I think he punches him a few times. He ends up, so the stuff that he was stealing. So I want to say the first time that the first guy that he went into his house, he actually, sat him down and he said, after the whole spiel and after he slapped him around, he said, he grabs the guy's wallet and he hands it to him and he says, "You need to pick out a credit card in here and tell me how much you're going to authorize for a single mother to put on this credit card, to purchase groceries or whatever." And the guy sat down and straight hand picked out 2 credit cards, and he said 500 on this one and 500 on this one. And then he also had he had a bunch of Crown Royal bags filled with silver dollars that Jason took as well. And when he left there, he went to the single mother's house that he knows. She was a drug addict, but she was a single mother who was struggling. He went and knocked on her door and he said, "Hey," he said, "I've got a present for you." And he said that he, took her and her two scraggly kids up to Walmart with these bags of silver dollars and these credit cards. And they sat there at the coin star, dumping these silver dollars into it. And and he just said, watching them, watching her get to go around Walmart and spend I don't even know how much it was. Um, like he said something like $1,100, but I'm not sure if that was just in silver dollars, $1,100 in silver dollars, and then in addition, the credit cards. But he said they got to go around Walmart and watching her buy those kids clothes and school supplies and toys was just surreal. So that was crime. That was crime number one. And then crime number two, so he knocks on the door, verifies the man's name, pushes his way in, does the same spiel, gives him the whole talking to. You're not gonna be, doing anything with kids in my neighborhood, in this town. You do not do that. Slaps him around, punches him a little bit, and he, I think he had asked him. He had tried to give him, Jason was asking him what he wanted to donate to, battered women or, abused women, single parents. And he tried to give over his bus pass. And Jason had been like, "You have a truck outside. Like, what do you mean a bus pass?" And he was like, "Well, I don't drive. I don't have a driver's license." So it was this old beater, Frontier truck, and like a Nissan Frontier, Toyota Tacoma, or something like that. And he was like, he ended up getting the guy to donate his truck. He was like, "Here, you can have the truck." And so he ended up limping this truck away from the place, and he took it to another woman's house, knocks on the door, and he's like dangling the keys. He's like, "I have a present for you," and ended up giving her this truck. And I think at the end of the day, she ended up, getting one of her connects to trade it out for something else that was drivable or that wasn't hot or stolen, right? Mm-hmm. But so that was what he ended up doing with the stuff he got from guy number two. And then we come to guy number three. Mm-hmm. And the thing, and the guy number one and guy number two, they were, they had been reported that they were currently molesting children, something along those lines. I don't know all the details, and that's really Jason's story to tell all those details. But basically, that's what that was. Guy number three wasn't necessarily being reported that he was currently doing something, but there were suspicions as he was found to be a predator who was on sex offender registry list from I think it was another state, and he had come to Alaska, and he was now a youth leader, like in the youth ministries or something along those lines. But he was, whatever it was, he was a youth leader of sorts. And there were rumors going around that there might be something going on. And so guy number three, Jason goes to the house. He knocks on the door for a while, and he doesn't answer. And he can see the guy. He goes to one of the windows, and he can see through the window, and he can see the guy sitting in the room. And he's trying to get him to answer the door, and he's just not responding at all. And so Jason had a backpack with him, which had a couple of things, a cell phone, some tools like a hammer, and, I think the notebook with the names on it, just a few, items. And so he takes the hammer and he breaks a sidelight window, and that's how he gets into the house. Well, he thinks either there was somebody staying with him or he had a bed and breakfast or something, because a couple kind of popped out of the hallway, and he knew who the guy looked like. So he knew this wasn't the guy. And he just kind of tells him, "You get back in your room. This has nothing to do with you." So the people go back in their room, shuts the door, and he sees the next door. Somebody's trying to shut the door. And so he sticks his foot in the door, and he's like, and he pushes the door open, and there this guy is. And, he basically tries to tell him, sit down on the bed or whatever, and he wouldn't do it. He refused. And the guy started fighting back. He started fighting back. He started to punch Jason. and he punched Jason a couple of times. And when Jason had first walked into the door, he had set down the backpack in between the two of them. And when the guy started to attack him, he just reached down and he grabbed the backpack and he grabbed the hammer out. And it was just, he basically said that this man was the same height and same stature as the man who molested him, Larry Fulton. And that's what he saw at that moment, was he saw Larry Fulton. And he just reached back with that hammer, and the guy's punching him. He reached back with the hammer and he just cracked down. And the first hit that the first contact that he made was his collarbone. And then he probably hit him 2 or 3 more times on the face and the head. And I think there was at some point in there where he said, right before he hit him, or right when he walked into the room, he said, "I am the avenging angel, and I'm here to mete out justice for the people you have hurt," was his exact words. So he hits him until the guy passes out and he's kind of slumped over in his own puddle of blood. And he, gets up and he leaves. He gets up and he leaves. So they're in a cul-de-sac and he's about to leave. He's driving down to the end of the street. He's about to turn his lights on. And as he gets down to the end of the street, he flips on his lights and all of a sudden there's a few cop cars there. And obviously it was the couple that were in the other room that actually called the cops on him. And that's how they ended up catching him.
Following his arrest, it would be reported that Jason had obtained the names and addresses of his victims from the sex offender registry, which in most states, if not all, lists this information in a publicly available database. But Angelina insists that this is not the case, that each of the victims were known to Jason before he looked up their information on the registry.
So first thing, let me clear up. He actually didn't get their information. Yes, he got their information from the sex offender registry, but he did not find these people he didn't just go on there on the sex offender registry looking for pedophiles to go beat up. What actually happened is that, he had this underground community that he was a part of in Anchorage, like the gangsters, the hoodlums, that kind of thing. Let's start off with something he's not actually convicted of. He was a part of the Boys and Girls Club. Like, he would volunteer, he did stuff there, and there was this brother and sister there that were very close to him, and they were talking about how their dad abused them and stuff, and he was not down with that. So one day, he went over to that trailer where they lived, and he picked up the dad by his shirt and put him up against the trailer and basically threatened him and said, "Listen, I know what you're doing to these kids. And if I hear that you're doing it again, I'm going to come back over here and it will not be pretty." Basically, he threatened him, and he got a very positive response from the man and the whole situation. So that's like just a small portion of the story. There was another time where he was, hanging out with these 2 girls at this hotel. They were about getting ready to go party for the weekend, and one of the girls gets a phone call from one of her girlfriends saying that she had just been raped by these 3 military dudes. And so he rounds them up and he goes and picks up the girl who's been raped, and she takes him to the hotel that she had just been raped at, and he ends up finding these dudes' rooms, and ends up beating them down, and basically, so this is that is his MO. Like, that's the kind of stuff he did. He did not sit down, he did not go to the internet and look up the registry and start writing these names down. So what had happened was, there are people who would tell him about these situations, and he started becoming this go-to person for, hey, this is what's going on here, this is what's going on here. And that is how he was found with, I think, a list of 9 names. The list started off with 8 names, and as he went around to these people's places, like one of the places was, I think, like an apartment complex of sorts. And he wasn't able to get the person that he was trying to find to answer the door. And so these 2, I guess they kind of little thugs that kind of run that apartment complex, like they're kind of the leaders of the place, kind of see him because he's all gloved up and masked up. Obviously, he's up to no good. They see him and they're like, "Well, hey, what are you doing here?" And he was like, "Well, there's, this registered sex offender here who has been reported that he's been doing blah, 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 just recently by these people. And, I'm trying to, get in there and talk to this dude. And they're like, oh, really? Okay. So he ended up making a deal with them. They're going to leave the gate open for him. And they're like, we have another name for you, like this pedophile or a rapist or whatever. And so that's how he got those names. But what happened was when people were giving him these names, he would go to the internet to look them up, to find their information, to find out where they lived, to do more research on them. And majority of them happened to already be registered sex offenders who were reoffending. So that is how he got the names. He did not just go randomly pick random people off of the registry.
While Angelina was shocked to learn that her brother had become known as the Alaskan Avenger, this vigilante figure that has become a hero to some and a villain to others, she does not believe that his actions were totally righteous. She doesn't agree with his actions, but has vowed to support him nonetheless.
Yes, he did commit a crime. And I'm not saying, me personally, I'm not saying what he did was right. A lot of people do. They will never go back on their word on saying what he did was right. I'm not going to say that personally, but that's where that comes from. And I think a lot of his supporters are also mothers themselves who have children. Maybe not necessarily survivors themselves, but they have children. And if they just play out the scenario. If anybody touches their children, heck yes, like I support that. So I think that's where a lot of these supporters come from. There are the people who are like, no, you can't, vigilante justice has no room in a ordered society, that kind of thing. And people are just going to have their different views on that.
Yeah, I'm kind of like in the same boat. Like I think that it's kind of like this interesting moral conundrum because like on one hand, I do think that punishments for a lot of sex-related crimes aren't nearly enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then like on the flip side, I also don't agree with, the actions that he did carrying out this crime.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also like there should be like a happy balance between both sides of the spectrum. So right. I agree with that. Yeah.
Well, let's just take a step back for a second and think about when he was a child. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was a child, his stepfather molested him. His stepfather was convicted in a courtroom, in the same courtroom that Jason was convicted himself. His stepfather was convicted in that same courtroom of molesting his own adopted sons. And he was sentenced to 3 years of suspended jail time, which means it's 3 years of probation. And let's also think about the fact that their mother stood by his side the entire time. The church was involved. The church stood by his side. They swept everything under the rug. They asked the kids to forgive him. Hey, the church told them, remember to say you never ejaculated. All of this happened. And then he was actually allowed to go back and father Jason after this. Jason was never removed from the home. The mother took them back in, and he had to live with Larry Fulton, who was convicted of molesting him himself for the next 4 years until he ran away. And then fast forward down the road to where the justice system has failed him miserably, and he commits these crimes, and they're going to sentence him to 23 years. That is insane to me, insanely outrageous. I'm not saying, like I said, I will never say that what he did was right, but I think that they are very, very mistaken, and I think maybe a little corrupt in their sentencing and what they stand behind as far as the justice system goes. That's my opinion on it.
Following his arrest, Jason Vukovich pleaded not guilty to the 18 charges of assault and robbery filed against him. He eventually agreed to plead guilty to first-degree attempted assault and robbery, and was later sentenced to more than 20 years in prison, as well as 5 years probation tacked on at the end. In the years since, Jason has unsuccessfully appealed his sentence, with his most recent appeal claiming that PTSD stemming from his childhood trauma had led him to commit these crimes, having been rejected in October of 2020.
The appeal was basically to state, we're appealing the fact that they did not consider his PTSD diagnosis in whenever they sentenced him. And what they came back and with the denial is that they said, well, you didn't present enough evidence of his PTSD diagnosis, so therefore we didn't consider it, is basically what they came back and said. And we we appealed at the state and the Supreme Court level, and it was denied both times. So
However, Jason and Angelina, his most ardent supporter, vowed to continue appealing his sentence and using every legal avenue at their disposal to continue fighting Jason's extended sentence.
yes, so currently we have applied for post-conviction relief, and you're going to have to excuse my lack of knowledge in the law field, but and terminology. But basically, from what I understand, is post-conviction relief is whenever your appeal gets denied, and the basis that his appeal got denied on was that they didn't present enough evidence of his PTSD diagnosis. Well, now with post-conviction relief, we can basically go back and apply for that and say, well, our representation at the time of sentencing and during the hearing did not do the bare minimum to present the PTSD diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that I don't like about it is that we were actually assigned the exact same judge 23 years in the first place. And then if we lose that, if he denies that post-conviction relief request, then we basically can continue to do post-conviction relief requests and say, okay, well, the next attorney didn't do their job on filing the post-conviction relief well enough, or that kind of thing. But in reality, our hopes, what our hearts are really set on, is going to be the discretionary parole in July of 2023. That's where we're really focusing all of our efforts. That's where the hope is that we really hope that he can be granted discretionary parole if we do all of the right things, get him PTSD treatment, have him take every class and every get every certificate possible in, while he's locked up, everything like that. We're doing everything that we possibly can to basically show the parole board he's a changed person. We're going to try to get him a degree while he's in there. We're going to try to get him a job lined up, have a place to live, have some money to get him on his feet. Do all of the things that we can tell the parole board that, hey, we promise he's not, you can see all the work that we've done. He's not going to go out and do this again, kind of thing.
In the years since his conviction, Jason has expressed extreme remorse for his actions, and has indicated that he would not repeat his actions from June 2016 if he were to be given the chance to. In a letter written to the Anchorage Daily Press in 2017, he wrote, "I thought back to my experiences as a child. I took matters into my own hands and assaulted 3 pedophiles. If you have already lost your youth, like me, due to a child abuser, please do not throw away your present and your future by committing acts of violence. I began my life sentence many, many years ago. It was handed down to me by an ignorant, hateful, poor substitute for a father. I now face losing most of the rest of my life due to a decision to lash out at people like him. To all those who have suffered like I have, love yourself and those around you. This is truly the only way forward." Angelina continues to support one of the newest additions to her family, the big brother that she never had a chance to know growing up, and, as you've heard, continues to fight for his release from prison. Despite not condoning what Jason did, she believes that there are steps we all can take to help prevent stories like Jason's from unfolding again in the future.
I absolutely think that treatment and counseling and therapy 100 million% should be a part of this. And it's actually not. I think it should be mandatory, first of all. I think it 100% should be mandatory. Not only is it not mandatory for these guys, but it's hard to even get them, even if they ask for it, it's almost nearly impossible to get them the treatment that they need. And I absolutely think that is what is needed. And I think mental assessments need to be, taken, all of that. And my personal opinion on the way Jason was sentenced is that they did not take into consideration any of that, any of the things that he had gone through in his life, and the fact that it was their own fault for letting him down. You know, back in 1990, or 1993, I think it is. I don't think that they took any of that into consideration. And then for them to give him 23 years, I mean, even I think 5 years, if I were to, if I heard that he got 5 years, I would be like, oh, that's a little rough. I mean, these guys were pedophiles after all. And if they had actually listened to his story, they were being reported that they were currently offending, I don't know. I definitely think that therapy and counseling and all of that, and psych evaluations should be a part of that. I really do. And I think 100% that the sentencing for predators should be way, way more than what it is currently.
All right. So I guess I just have one final question, and this would probably be like the send off for the episode. What would you like to say to people that agree with Jason and may want to support him in the future?
That we definitely appreciate everyone's support, and that I will say this, that whenever I started this journey with my brother, and just to put it out there, I personally was never abused as a child. I've never been raped, anything like that. So whenever this whole thing came about, the amount of messages that I received, excuse me, from survivors was unreal to me, and just know that there's people out here who are trying to make a change, and hang in there, keep your head up, and don't be afraid to come forward. We want to have a platform for survivors to be able to step up and voice what's going on. Children, we want the children to know that there's a safe place that you can go and say things, and that it's not your fault. So, yeah.